Hi everyone, this is Neel Raithatha, also known as the Wax Whisperer. Thank you for joining me in my latest video. We have here a very interesting case of a patient who attended with dead skin keratin lining the canal walls and also their eardrum. And as you can see, this dead skin is taking a very moldy appearance. The patient advised me that they do regularly, purposely get water in the ear, thinking it's the right thing to do to wash out their ears. And as a result, what's happened is that the outer layer of skin that lines the ear canal, the epidermis, has absorbed all the water. So the ear canal has basically been waterlogged, and this excess water is absorbed by the epithelial skin cells that form the epidermis. So they're hydrophilic, and subsequently the skin cells overhydrate, they swell, and the cell membranes burst. And you get the maceration of skin, so that's when the skin becomes very soft and mushy. That then can lead on to a fungal infection. So fungus and bacteria love warm, moist, damp conditions. So not only is the ear dark because it's an internal cul-de-sac, without the illumination provided by the eye clear scope, without illuminating the inside of the ear, we wouldn't be able to see because it is very dark in there. It's warm, and the water provides the fungi and bacteria the moisture that it requires. So it's a perfect breeding ground for harmful microorganisms, and which can then multiply and colonize the ear canal and lead to an ear infection. And I've managed to remove the majority of the dead skin. This piece of skin, as you can see, is embedded on the patient's eardrum, and I've just peeled away the posterior aspect of the skin that's hiding the eardrum. The ear canal is quite narrow. I think I was using a standard Zollner suction probe, which is approximately 2.1 millimeters in diameter. It has an internal diameter of 1.7, give or take, millimeters. And now I'm just using the fine end. We're using an 18 gauge fine end. So approximately the outer diameter, if memory serves me correct, is about 1.28 mils, and the internal diameter is around 1.02 mil. The fine end immediately provides me with the additional working space that I need. I have just bent the tip of the fine end. You can see there's a little kink in the tube, and that allows me to gain access to the front part of the eardrum in particular. If that tube was completely straight, it would be very likely come in contact with the anterior canal wall, so the canal wall to the right where it protrudes out, as you can see. So that kink really just helps keep away from the bony part here. I just removed some skin directly off the eardrum. So the eardrum is intact. You can see the hammer bone there. You can almost think about this patient's ear like an onion. It had several layers of dead skin, and we're just peeling it away to reveal a fresher layer of skin that this dead skin is sitting on. And as I'm peeling this away, you can see that there's a thick layer of white dead skin, and on top of that you've got a darker layer of dead skin. The whiter layer of dead skin is skin that has more recently died and shedded but failed to migrate, and the skin sitting on top of it, the darker one, is an older layer of dead skin that had previously died and shedded and failed to migrate, and that has oxidized, hence why it's darker appearance. I'm just trying to peel away as much skin as I can now. They, even at this stage, reported hearing significantly better. You can imagine the sound can now travel through. It's able to bounce off the canal walls and be directed to the eardrum. When you've got all that debris on the ear canal walls, the dead skin absorbs a lot of the sound pressure of the sound waves that enter the ears, so it reduces the intensity. So by the time the sound hits the eardrum, it's at a lower amplitude, lower amplification level. So having otitis externa, which is what this patient's got, can normally reduce high frequency hearing. So the high frequencies get, because of the shorter wavelength, they come in contact with the canal wall more and therefore lose energy as the sound waves travels through the ear canal towards the eardrum. Lower frequency sounds have a longer wavelength, so they're in less contact with the canal wall and they are able to hit the eardrum more directly. So a lot of the sound energy is preserved with low frequency sound. The lower frequencies, in terms of audiology, when we do a hearing test, our test frequencies are 250 hertz up to 8 kilohertz. The human ear has got the ability to hear between the ranges of 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. But when we, as an audiologist, when we do hearing tests, we focus more on the 250 hertz to 8 kilohertz as standard. And these are typically known as your speech frequencies. So around 500 hertz to 1 kilohertz, maybe even 1.5 kilohertz, they're normally your vowels. So the vowels provide us with the volume in speech typically. And from 2 kilohertz onwards, you've got your consonants. There is a crossover, so you get some vowels that also exceed 2 kilohertz and maybe some consonants that are below 2 kilohertz. But as a general rule of thumb, above 2 and 3 kilohertz, you've got your consonants. The consonants are the beginnings and endings of words, and they provide us the clarity. And so when you've got otitis externa, because it affects the higher frequencies more, it can not necessarily always affect volume of the speech, but it can reduce the clarity of the speech. So the individual can hear what's being said, but not clearly because of the reduced high frequency content. When we have age-related hearing loss, and we call that presbycusis, the hair cells, the sensory hair cells within the organ of hearing, the cochlea, that code for high frequency sounds are located near the entrance of the organ of hearing, the cochlea. Therefore, over the years, because they are located near the entrance, they're more likely to experience trauma and damage. I always compare it when I discuss it with my patients to like a carpet in a hallway. The carpet near the front door typically gets worn out first because it's more exposed to people walking over it, with it being near the front door. Similarly to the sensory hair cells that code for the higher frequencies, because they're located near the entrance of the ear canal. As sound waves travel through the ear, they hit the eardrum vibrates, and these vibrations are then transmitted to the 3 middle ear bones, the ossicles. They are also known as the hammer bone, medically known as the malleus, the anvil, which is the middle of the 3 bones, medically known as the incus, and then finally the stirrup bone, which is the smallest bone in the body, and that's medically known as the stapes. The stapes bone is connected to the cochlea, the organ of hearing, via a window called the oval window. And when the stapes bone vibrates, it goes forwards and backwards into the oval window, and that motion sets off waves of fluid within the organ of hearing. So the organ of hearing is full of these sensory hair cells, more namely the outer hair cells and the inner hair cells, and they're contained in fluid. So there's 2 types of cochlear fluid. We've got perilymph fluid and endolymph fluid, and it's the endolymph fluid that travels in waves, and these waves of fluid travel over the hair cells, and it all depends on the frequency of sound. So with a high frequency sound, the wavelength is shorter, so it stimulates the higher frequencies near the entrance of the cochlea. And if it's lower frequency sounds, the hair cells that code for the lowest frequency sounds are at the apex of the organ of hearing, so furthest away. So the base at the base of the organ of hearing, it's the higher frequencies. At the apex, it's the higher low frequencies. Therefore, because fluid is constantly, whether it's a low or high frequency sound, traveling over in some parts the higher frequency hair cells, they're continuously getting worn out, and they get worn out quicker. Noise-induced hearing loss. We do live in a noisy world. A lot of the noise in factories, for example, recreational noise, shooting, for example, they are more at the higher frequencies. So higher frequencies are just more predisposed to getting damaged. And therefore, I'll just explain how the hair cells work. So as the fluid travels over the hair cells, depending upon the wavelength of sound, the hair cells then shear side to side. when they shear side to side, you get a chemical change within the hair cells. They kind of shrink, allowing chemicals in, and that lifts a membrane that they're connected to, the basilar membrane, which then in turn, essentially, when the hair cells vibrate, it goes through physical and chemical changes to produce an electrical signal. And this electrical signal is then transported up the hearing nerve, the auditory nerve, the eighth cranial nerve, to the brain, where it's processed. So it is a very intricate and complex system, and sometimes it's even when I attempt to kind of just simplify it a bit, it still is quite confusing. So essentially, you got the outer ear, which is the ear canal, and the pinna, so the satellite dish on the outside, which is responsible for the capture and transfer of sound waves through to the middle ear, where the sounds hit the eardrum. So the eardrum is made up of the middle ear. The eardrum vibrates. The vibrations are transmitted through the three bones to the inner ear, the organ of hearing, where little hair cells then vibrate and shear side to side in response to the sound waves. They in turn produce an electrical signal which is sent to the brain, and we perceive that as sound. The most common symptom of having a high frequency hearing loss is a lack of clarity. So people suffering from noise-induced hearing loss, where it's the higher frequencies typically that are affected, or diabetes-induced hearing loss, because diabetes can restrict blood flow to the higher frequencies and more than the lower frequencies in the organ of hearing. And just simple age-related presbycusis hearing loss, it affects more the higher frequencies. Certain medications, ototoxic medications, so some of these medications can include aminoglycosides, so they are antibiotics that end in mycin, either spelled MYCIN or MICIN. So examples are neomycin, gentamicin, erythromycin, streptomycin. Aspirin in very high dosages, I think you're looking at 500 milligrams 3 or 4 times a day, so it's a very extreme high dose. That can potentially cause hearing loss. Diuretics, water tablets, furosemide, for example. Cisplatin, which is typically given when you undergo chemotherapy, cisplatin can affect high frequency sounds. And finally, quinine. So quinine is given for anti-malarial treatment, preventative treatment, or post-contracting of malaria treatment, and also leg cramps. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video, guys, and the explanation of how we hear and how hearing loss can affect us. Take care, speak soon, bye.